You are looking directly at one right now, and you don't know it. That patch of rock, that clump of algae, that shadow between two coral heads. Any one of them could be a creature with 3 hearts, blue blood, and a nervous system so strange that some scientists refuse to call it a mind at all. They call it something else entirely, because mind doesn't quite cover it. We are not talking about a monster from the deep trenches. We are talking about something far stranger, an animal you could hold in your hands, an animal sold in fish markets, an animal that, if you looked directly at it a moment ago, you might not have seen at all. The octopus. Here's the strange part. Everything that makes an octopus remarkable didn't come from the same evolutionary toolkit that built human intelligence, dolphin intelligence, or even bird intelligence. It was built from scratch, on a completely separate branch of the tree of life, hundreds of millions of years before anything resembling a human brain existed. Nature ran the experiment of what if intelligence evolved twice, and the octopus is the answer. Over the next several minutes, we're going into that answer. How a boneless, shell-less animal turned its entire body into a disguised generator. How it thinks with 9 separate processing centers instead of 1. How it plans for a future it cannot see. And how, against everything scientists assumed for decades, it might be capable of something close to conversation with other species entirely. This is not a story about a clever sea creature. This is a story about what intelligence looks like when it evolves without any of the rules we assumed applied. We tend to think of intelligence as something rare, something that requires a specific set of ingredients, a backbone, a skull, a centralized brain built up slowly over hundreds of millions of years of shared vertebrate history. The octopus had none of that. No skeleton, no shared lineage with anything we'd normally call smart. And it still built something that can plan, remember, deceive, and apparently even negotiate with other species. If intelligence can emerge twice, independently, from 2 completely different starting points, the obvious question is what else we've been assuming was rare that actually isn't. To understand why the octopus became so intelligent, you first have to understand how exposed it is. Roughly 140 million years ago, the ancestors of today's octopus made an evolutionary bet that should have ended in extinction. They abandoned their shells. Every other mollusk on the planet, clams, snails, nautiluses, kept their armor. The octopus's lineage threw it away. Losing the shell was a trade. In exchange for permanent vulnerability, the octopus gained a body that could squeeze, fold, and pour itself into spaces no armored animal could ever reach. A gap the width of a coin, a crack in a rock barely wider than its own eyeball. But that trade only works if you can avoid the mouths lining up to eat you in the meantime. A soft-bodied, boneless animal in open water is, in blunt terms, a snack. Moray eels, sharks, dolphins, seals. The ocean is stacked with predators built to specialize in exactly this kind of prey. So the octopus needed a different kind of armor. Not armor you wear, armor you become. What it developed is, by a wide margin, the most advanced camouflage system found anywhere in the animal kingdom. More sophisticated than a chameleon, more sophisticated than a cuttlefish, more sophisticated than anything with feathers, fur, or scales has ever managed. And it isn't one trick. It's 3 separate systems, stacked on top of each other, working in concert in a fraction of a second. Picture thousands of tiny balloons embedded across the octopus's skin, each one filled with pigment, reds, browns, yellows, blacks. These are chromatophores, and each is wrapped in a ring of muscle fibers that the octopus controls directly. Contract the muscles, and the balloon stretches wide, flooding that patch of skin with color. Relax them, and the balloon shrinks to a near-invisible dot. A single octopus can carry millions of these across its body, and it can fire them independently, patch by patch, to build almost any pattern imaginable: modeled sand, striped coral, blotched rock, in real time. But color alone isn't enough, because color alone can't fake shine. Underneath the chromatophores sits a second layer, iridophores, stacks of ultra-thin reflective plates that bend and bounce light to produce shimmering blues, greens, and metallic sheens, the kind of light play you'd see off wet coral or sunlit water. Below that is a third layer, leucophores, which scatter ambient light back out to create white and pale tones, matching whatever brightness surrounds it. 3 layers, pigment, shine, and brightness, combined into a single living projection screen. And then there's the final move, the one that turns a convincing disguise into something almost unbelievable: texture. Using small muscular structures called papillae, an octopus can physically reshape its own skin in less than a second. Smooth surfaces suddenly erupting into spikes, ridges, and bumps that mimic coral or algae, or barnacled rock. It isn't just changing what it looks like. It's changing what it feels like in 3 dimensions on command. One field researcher clocked a single octopus switching its full body camouflage 177 times in a single hour, a new disguise roughly every 20 seconds, all day, every day, for its entire life. That is not a party trick. That is a full-time survival job, performed at a speed no predator can track. And here's what should stop you. Octopuses are colorblind. Every one of these perfectly matched disguises is being generated by an animal that, as far as we can tell, cannot see color the way we do. Think about what that actually means. Every disguise you've ever seen in an octopus documentary, every mottled patch of sand, every stripe of coral, every shadow of drifting kelp, was built by an animal working from what is essentially a black and white picture of the world. It isn't matching hue to hue the way a human decorator would match paint swatches. It's solving the problem some entirely different way, and for a long time, nobody could explain how. For a long time, that was one of the deepest mysteries in marine biology. How do you match a shade you can't perceive? In 2015, researchers found part of the answer, and it reframed everything. The same light-sensitive proteins found in an octopus's eyes are also present across its skin, spread over its arms, its mantle, its suckers. Skin samples, even fully detached from the body, still responded to changes in light and triggered chromatophore activity on their own. The octopus doesn't just see the reef with 2 eyes pointed forward. In some functional sense, it sees the reef with its entire surface area. Picture thousands of tiny balloons embedded across the octopus's skin. That single discovery forces a strange question. If an octopus can sense light through its skin independent of its brain, how much of what an octopus does isn't really coming from its brain at all? This is where the comparison to other color-changing animals falls apart. A chameleon changes color too, but it takes 20 seconds or longer because chameleon color change runs on hormones, chemical signals that have to travel through the bloodstream, a slow, whole-body broadcast. The octopus doesn't wait on hormones. Its color change is wired directly into its nervous system, fired the same way a reflex fires in you. Nerve impulse to muscle, almost instantaneously. Some researchers have compared it to breathing, something an octopus can consciously direct when it wants to, but that also runs on autopilot beneath conscious awareness, adjusting constantly without being told to. Which raises the real question underneath all of this. If the skin can sense on its own, and the color response can fire without waiting for a command from the brain, where, exactly, does the octopus begin and end? This is the part of the octopus story that breaks the model most people carry around in their head about how a brain is supposed to work. An octopus has roughly 500 million neurons. For context, that's more than a dog, more than a cat, more than nearly every bird on the planet. For a boneless invertebrate, a group of animals we don't usually associate with anything close to complex cognition, that number is almost absurd. A garden snail, by comparison, gets by on about 20,000. But here's the part that actually matters. Only around a third of those 500 million neurons sit inside the octopus's central brain. The other 2/3, the majority, are distributed out along its 8 arms in dense clusters of nerve tissue called ganglia. Each arm effectively runs its own local nervous system. This isn't a minor technical detail. It means each arm can process sensory information and initiate movement without waiting for permission from the brain. Scientists have documented that a severed octopus arm can continue to respond to stimuli for up to an hour after separation, recoiling from something painful, reaching toward food, even attempting to move that food toward where a mouth used to be. None of that requires input from a central brain, because for that arm, in that moment, there effectively isn't one telling it what to do. Every arm is also lined with suckers, and every sucker doubles as a chemical sensor, capable of tasting and smelling whatever it touches. When an octopus reaches into a crevice hunting for a crab, it doesn't need visual confirmation of what's inside. The arm tastes the water, feels the texture of the surface, and its local nerve cluster makes the call, grab, or keep searching, often before that information ever reaches the central brain at all. So how does an animal running 8 semi-independent limbs avoid total chaos? How do the arms not tangle, collide, or work against each other? The answer looks less like a dictator giving orders and more like a conductor leading an orchestra. The central brain doesn't micromanage every twitch of every arm. It sets the broad goal: hunt here, hide there, investigate that, and lets each arm's local intelligence handle the execution. During a hunt, an octopus can have multiple arms independently probing different crevices at once, each processing its own sensory feedback in parallel, while the central brain integrates just enough information to decide when and where to commit to a strike. It is, effectively, 9 brains running at once, 1 coordinating, 8 executing, and it lets the octopus process far more simultaneous sensory information than any single centralized brain, including ours, could manage on its own. There's an unsettling implication buried in this setup that's worth sitting with. When you decide to pick something up, the decision and the motion both belong to you. A single, unified sense of self directing a single body. An octopus doesn't obviously have that same guarantee. Researchers have run experiments where an octopus's arm, exploring a maze-like chamber outside the animal's direct line of sight, will locate food and begin retrieving it before there's any clear evidence the central brain even knows what that arm has found. The arm isn't waiting for instructions. It's already acting on its own read of the situation. Whether that means each arm carries a flicker of separate awareness, or whether the whole system somehow still adds up to one unified experience, is a question neuroscientists are still nowhere close to settling. Either answer is strange. There may not be a comfortable one. Here's where the story gets genuinely strange, because this level of cognitive complexity should not exist on this branch of the tree of life, not according to how intelligence is supposed to evolve. Trace human intelligence back through the fossil record, and you eventually land on a common ancestor shared with dogs, cats, dolphins, and birds, a lizard-like creature from roughly 320 million years ago, already equipped with a backbone for limbs and a centralized nervous system built for life on land. Vertebrate intelligence, in other words, is one continuous, connected story, all of it built from the same basic architecture, elaborated on in different directions over millions of years. To find the point where the octopus's lineage splits off from ours, you don't go back 320 million years. You go back roughly 600 million years to a creature that looked nothing like a proto-brain animal at all. A simple flatworm with a bare minimum nervous system and nothing resembling intelligence as we'd recognize it. From that split, 2 completely separate experiments in intelligence ran in parallel. One produced everything on the vertebrate branch: humans, primates, dolphins, elephants, crows. The other, unfolding independently in mollusks, eventually produced the octopus and its cephalopod relatives. Because that second branch developed its version of intelligence earlier in evolutionary time than the vertebrate branch did, cephalopods may well have been the first genuinely intelligent animals to ever exist on Earth, full stop, before anything with a spine had the neural architecture to plan, problem solve, or remember. 2 entirely separate blueprints for a mind, arrived at independently, converging on strikingly similar outcomes. That's not a coincidence you'd expect from a universe with only one recipe for intelligence. Every strange thing you just watched, the skin that sees light on its own, the 8 arms running their own separate thoughts, a creature dragging shelter across open sand for a danger it can't yet see, came from an animal we share almost nothing with. No skeleton, no shared blueprint. 600 million years of separate evolution, and it still arrived somewhere we'd recognize as a mind. That's the part worth sitting with. We assume intelligence is rare, that it needs a spine, a skull, millions of years building on the same design. The octopus is proof that isn't true. Nature found a second way to build a thinking creature from spare parts on the opposite side of the tree of life. And it's still down there right now, watching, thinking, disguised as something you'd walk right past. If this made you look at the ocean a little differently, that's the whole point. There's more waiting below the surface than most people ever see. Subscribe if you want to keep going down.